From the previous class, we have learnt about digestion and we have learnt flow chart, everything we have learnt from the digestion. So now we are going to learn another important life process that occurs in humans also, that is respiration. Okay, so open your textbook. We have discussed nutrition in organisms in the last section. The food material taken in during the process of nutrition is used in the cells to provide energy for various life processes. Diverse organisms do this in different ways. Diverse means many organisms do in different ways. Some use oxygen to break down glucose completely into carbon dioxide, water, and energy. Some use other pathways also. Yes, listen students, we all know all the living organisms that is sustaining in the world require some energy. And where we are getting the energy? We are getting the energy from the food we eat. So that food we eat should be broken down to get the energy. So the food is broken down with the help of oxygen. So some organisms like human beings will uses the organisms to break down the glucose and to produce carbon dioxide, water as well as energy. But there are some organisms, okay, for example yeast. Yeast is a unicellular organisms that will not requires oxygen to break down the glucose into simpler products to obtain energy. But in case of humans, glucose will be converted into simpler products and energy is released only when oxygen is supplied, isn't it? So, in this cases, a glucose which contains a 6 carbon molecule will be converted into a 3 carbon atom or molecule called pyruvate. So the first step is that glucose, which is a 6 carbon atom or molecule, will be converted into a 3 carbon atom called pyruvate. And this process takes place in the cytoplasm of every cell. So this process, conversion of glucose into pyruvate, doesn't require oxygen. But conversion of pyruvate into simpler products requires oxygen in case of humans. So pyruvate will be converted into carbon dioxide, water and energy when oxygen is utilized. But there are some organisms like yeast, which is a unicellular organism. The pyruvate will directly convert into ethanol, carbon dioxide and energy without utilizing oxygen. So wherever a oxygen is required to break down the glucose molecule, such type of respiration we are going to call it by a name aerobic respiration. Whereas some organism which doesn't require oxygen, means in absence of air or in absence of oxygen itself, what happens? It will breaks down the glucose or the food molecules. Then that kind of respiration is called anaerobic respiration. So this conversion of pyruvate into simpler product like carbon dioxide, water and energy takes place in the mitochondria of a human cells. Got it clear? But in some cases what happens means, in humans, especially in the muscle cells, in every muscle cells will not receive the sufficient oxygen for the oxidation of pyruvate. So in that case what happens means, during the lack of oxygen, means less amount of oxygen, when it has less amount of oxygen itself, the muscle cells will receive less amount of oxygen and the glucose or the pyruvate gets oxidized into lactic acid and energy is released. So this takes place in the muscle cells of our human, where in the muscle cells there will be lack of oxygen. What do you mean by lack of oxygen? Lack of oxygen means less amount of oxygen, because in muscle cells there is a unnecessity of supplying the more amount of oxygen. In the sense, more oxygen will not reach in the muscle cells, only less amount of oxygen will reach the muscle cells. In that case, pyruvate, which is a 3 carbon atom, will be broken down into lactic acid and energy is released, and lactic acid is again a 3 carbon atom. So we have a flow chart here. This flow chart represents the breakdown of glucose by various pathways. As I said, glucose converting into pyruvate doesn't require oxygen, so it gets converted into pyruvate in cytoplasm, and it depends upon 3 conditions. One is in yeast. In yeast means in absence of oxygen, it can be converted into ethanol, carbon dioxide and energy. Ethanol contains only 2 carbon atom in it, and pyruvate will be converted into carbon dioxide, water and energy in presence of oxygen, especially in the mitochondria of a human cell. Okay, you all learnt in the 9th class itself, mitochondria is called as powerhouse of a cells, which exactly looks like this. Mitochondria will looks like this, which is present in the cells. Okay, why it is called as powerhouse of the cell means in mitochondria only energy is released. That is why it is called as powerhouse of the cell. And in the last case, in the human muscle cells where there will be lack of oxygen, means less amount of oxygen, then that pyruvate will be converted into lactic acid, which is a 3 carbon atom, and energy is released. So in all these various pathways, the energy which is released is used up in making a special molecule called ATP. Okay, the energy which is released during the process of respiration, what happens? It will helps in the synthesis of a molecule called ATP. This ATP is only responsible for all the activities performing in the cells. So you would all thought that energy is released means okay, energy is released, then that energy is only making ourselves to sit or stand or speak. No. The energy which is released during cellular respiration will itself, will synthesis another molecule called ATP, adenosine triphosphate. The abbreviation of ATP is. So that ATP is only responsible for all the activities in the cell. Okay. So that is what breakdown of glucose. Yeah. Now we are going to learn how this oxygen and carbon dioxide is exchanged in plants. That you have learnt in the stomata functions itself, isn't it? So stomata is acts like a nostrils, like how humans have a nostrils. Through that nostrils only both carbon dioxide and oxygen gas exchange. Like that in plants, stomata acts as a nostrils where oxygen and carbon dioxide exchange takes place. Actually what happens means this stomatal pore will be very active during night times. Why it is very active during night times means during night times photosynthesis will not take place, because night time sunlight is not available, so photosynthesis will not take place. Since there is no photosynthesis, what happens? It will perform in an activity of elimination of carbon dioxide or oxygen gas with the help of stomata. So at the night times, the stomata will eliminates or major exchange of gas takes place during night times, whereas at the morning or the day times, what happens? Photosynthesis will take place, and the major activity during daytime will be photosynthesis, and the elimination of carbon dioxide or oxygen gas will be very less during the daytime, because the main focus during the daytime is only photosynthesis, and it will continue to do that photosynthesis. So this is how plants is going to take up the oxygen and give out the carbon dioxide through the stomata. Yes, one thing again you have to know is that one is terrestrial animals and another is aquatic animals. What is this terrestrial animals means? Terrestrial animals means the animals which lives on land. Can you give an example? Yes, there are many examples, the animals which lives on land. That is humans, we also live on land, and dog, cat, lion, tiger, deer, bear, everything are the terrestrial animals. So aquatic animals means what? Animals living in water. Examples are fishes, dolphins, sharks. These are all the examples of animals which lives in water. So when you see aquatic animals, or when you see any aquarium, Means aquarium is a place where aquatic animals lives. When you see those animals which lives in water, especially the fish, they will always open the mouth and close the mouth. Why do they do so? They constantly open the mouth and close the mouth. In the sense, why they are doing that? Why they do means they will take away the oxygen which is present in the water. Yes, water also contains the oxygen. So oxygen present in water is called as dissolved oxygen. Oxygen present in the water is called as dissolved oxygen. So your water will be having dissolved oxygen. So your fishes or any aquatic animals will takes away all the dissolved oxygen in them, and it starts to breathe up. But whereas the animals which lives up on the land, they doesn't require the dissolved oxygen because oxygen is present in the atmosphere itself, isn't it? So always the rate of breathing in aquatic organism is much faster than the terrestrial organism. Means what? Aquatic organism will breathe at a higher rate. They constantly breathe compared to the terrestrial organism. Why they constantly breathe? Why the rate of breathing in aquatic organisms is very fast? Because dissolved oxygen is fairly low compared to the amount of oxygen present in the air. So we the terrestrial organisms are very happy because all the oxygen is present in the air and we are able to breathe up easily. See, now we are all listening the video. While listening the video, you are all taking in the oxygen, you are all leaving the carbon dioxide out. So we are not feeling that. We are not feeling the breathing sensation. We are breathing normally because we have enormous amount of oxygen present in the atmosphere. Whereas aquatic animals, the dissolved oxygen content will be very less. So they have to continuously or constantly they have to breathe away. So the rate of breathing in aquatic animals will be very fast compared to the terrestrial organism. So that is what we have learned from this. Now we are going to learn how these human beings are going to take in the oxygen and give out the carbon dioxide. So this is the human respiratory system. So you are supposed to draw the diagram in a homework book once. So draw the diagram in homework book once and take a pic and send it in the group. So what happens, human beings? Human beings are going to intake the air, intake the oxygen through the nostrils. So through the nostrils it will takes in the air, and there will be hair present in the nose, or there will be hair present in the nostril. Those delicate hair structure, what it will do means it will remove some dust or any germs particles present in the air. Then after that the air enters the trachea, then it enters the pharynx, larynx. Then what happens? It enters the rings of cartilage. What is the role of this rings of cartilage? This is what rings of cartilage. What is the role of this rings of cartilage? This rings of cartilage, what it will do means it will not collapse the air. Rings of cartilage will not collapse the air. What it will not collapse the air? See, through the same pipe, through the same trachea pipe only, both oxygen is coming in and both carbon dioxide is going out. So both air should not mixed up. So to prevent the mixing up of both gases, rings of cartilage helps. Then what happens? Then the what is that? Then the oxygen enters into the lungs. Lungs is in the shape of a cone which is in a pinkish color. So the lungs, the oxygen enters into the lungs. When you zoom up and see, the lungs is divided into many branches like this, isn't it? Lungs is divided into many branches, and each branches are terminated into a small balloon-like structure. Can you see a small balloon-like structure? So each branches are terminated with a small balloon-like structures. Those balloon-like structures, when we elaborate and see, it will look like this. Those are all called as alveoli. So balloon-like structures which is present at the terminal part of the branches of the lungs. It is present on the both sides of the lung, and that is called as alveoli. So this alveoli surface area will be very more. Okay. The surface area of alveoli is very more, and this alveoli has a direct connection with the blood vessels. What is this blood vessels then? Blood vessels are the tube-like structure through which blood will be running through it. Blood vessels are the tube-like structures through which blood will be running through it. So this alveoli will be having a direct connect through this blood vessels. So what happens now when this oxygen enters into this alveoli, it enters into the blood vessels. Since blood flows through every part of the cells, this blood which is running inside the blood vessels will transport this oxygen to every cells of our body. So while it transports the oxygen to every cells of the body, the cells in turn return back the carbon dioxide which is produced during the cellular respiration, isn't it? So pyruvate will be broken down into carbon dioxide, water and energy. Water is required, energy is required, but carbon dioxide is not required, isn't it? So that carbon dioxide should be removed out from the cells. So that carbon dioxide will be the cells will be giving to the blood, and that blood vessels will carry all the carbon dioxide and it return back to the same alveoli. And that alveoli, what it will do, it will takes the carbon dioxide. It will takes the carbon dioxide, and the carbon dioxide reaches rings of cartilage, and it comes trachea, larynx, pharynx. Then it comes out through the nose. Then it comes out through the nose with the help of nostrils. So what happens means at the alveoli, the gaseous exchange takes place through the blood vessels. So one part of blood vessels will give the carbon dioxide which is collected from every cells of the body, and that will be released out through the nostrils, and other part of the blood vessels will takes in the oxygen and it supplies to all the cells of our body. This is how a gaseous exchange takes place in our human cells. Got it clear? And one thing you have to know about is that as I said, each and every cells will be receiving what? Will be receiving oxygen, and the same cell will give the carbon dioxide to the blood vessels. So blood will gives the oxygen with the help of diffusion also. But diffusion only will not helps in the supply of oxygen to every cells of the body. So one important pigment helps in the supply of oxygen from blood to every cells of the body. So remember students, alveoli will supply the oxygen to the blood vessels. Blood vessels, that is the blood which is present in the blood vessels, will transport the blood to every cells of the body, and it gives the oxygen to the every cells of the body with the help of diffusion. But only with the diffusion, the oxygen will not reaches every cells of the body. For example, from alveoli, if the cells present in the toes also wants the oxygen, so from alveoli, the the oxygen should reach the toes, and the toes cells also require oxygen. So diffusion takes place, means it takes place more than here they have given it takes place more than 3 years, it seems. It takes place more than 3 years. What it takes place more than 3 years? To diffuse the oxygen from blood to toes. To diffuse the oxygen from blood to the cells of the toes, it takes 3 years. So diffusion in a higher organism is very, very impossible. So in order to reduce this tension, a blood itself is containing a respiratory pigment called hemoglobin. So what this hemoglobin will do means, hemoglobin has a very high affinity for oxygen. Affinity means what? Binding. It will easily binds the oxygen. Hemoglobin, that is a respiratory pigment which is present in all the RBC cells of our blood. RBC is called as red blood corpuscles, which present in every blood. It is present in every blood. So what it will do means, this hemoglobin which is present in RBC cells of our blood, it will binds the oxygen and it will supplies to each and every cells of our body. So if diffusion is not possible, of course diffusion also takes place in some part of our cells of our body, but if diffusion is not possible to diffuse the oxygen from blood to the cells, this respiratory pigment called hemoglobin does this work to supply the oxygen from blood to cells of our body. So respiratory pigment is called as hemoglobin, and you know this term called hemoglobin, isn't it? The blood is in which color? Human blood is in red color. Why it is in red color? Because of the pigment called hemoglobin. So the blood is in red color is also because of hemoglobin, and also it helps in the transport of oxygen from blood vessels to every cells of the body. So this is about respiration. In the next class, we will be learning about transportation in human beings.